Okay, so I'm redoing the Genesis Revisited video. I don't delete these videos, so anybody who, that's not happening. But, Genesis is sort of a Bible in itself. There's more variations in a single chapter of Genesis than, all 10 dialects of this. But so from the Hebrew and the Aramaic, before that you have the Syrian, and before that you have the Akkadian, and then the Babylonian and the Sumerian. Well, there's 15 cuneiform languages or something like that. There's a couple that I never learned how to read. But so is modern science catching up with ancient knowledge? Yes, in certain ways. The spiritual knowledge is being confirmed. There's things that the ancients did that we can't quite figure out, or we've only recently been able to figure out. But let's not exaggerate the position here. Adam is the first test tube baby. The reference of, well, blood has to be included. Well, I mean, what animal doesn't subsist on blood? Eve, the original beneficent of organ transplant surgery. Yeah, that's going too far. There's meaning behind ribs and stuff like that. Does nuclear fission destroy Sodom and Gomorrah? All this talk about nuclear war in the ancient past, we gotta consider these things in terms of evidence. If for 300,000 years there's evidence of a nuclear explosion, natural or otherwise, let's see it. This south of Sinai and all sorts of other places that people like Zecharia Sitchin claim that the aliens carried out their wars. Now, there were devices to calculate things in the ancient past, but a device that, makes a mark or something like this is not quite what we're thinking when we think of a computer printout. The accurate details of our solar system, some of that could have been spiritually revealed, but it's also possible that some of it was a product of hundreds or thousands of years of following these things. We're rather impatient nowadays. The myths, now, when it comes to the host of heaven, or, the stellar bodies, not the spiritual beings, are there spiritual beings that their mythology is being put into this? Is the history of the planets, or an idea of what the planets and the rest of the solar system, is there an idea about that, oh, they came up with gods to worship later? Were there entities that wanted to superimpose their way? You do get some interesting information about the moon and this Earth. Yes, it could have been formed by an impact quite some time ago. And the Earth was entirely molten, and some of the descriptions or names of the Earth fit in rather well with what we're finding. But, one mythology out of thousands, and perhaps it survived better because it's made more sense. So, the solar system, Joseph and the sun and the moon and 12 planets. Yes, various things could have been symbolic. Yes, the ages, okay, what's the Psalm say? A day like 1,000 years, and then 6 days. So 6,000 times something. There could be things that were uncovered by looking at these numbers. I mean, eclipses happened. So all this sun disk stuff. Oh, nobody. People went blind a couple hundred years ago looking at the sun. And yes, there's stuff that goes on with comets. And comets can tell us things that we don't notice about the solar system, other large bodies out there, and stuff like this. And the myths kind of match up if there is a large planet out there that, it's sending it inward. Around the time I was born, NASA found like 9 planets or large objects out there that weren't quite mapped yet. Now I think they've all been labeled planetoids, but there's still a couple that are even larger that they don't quite give a position of. But, I mean, if it's out there 40 times as far as Pluto or something like that, the idea of it going through the solar system and causing some degree of havoc every 3,600 years doesn't quite make sense. Psalm 18:16, 2 Samuel 22:16, the Tebel, the tectonic plates and what stuff that took longer than one would have figured out. But if people figure an inch, and if they have a general idea of a continent, they may be figured, over the millions of years, they're going to unite together. So that kind of doesn't quite mesh up. Now, the idea that Phobos 2, now that actually makes more sense in terms of the whole alien thing than anything else, because that ovoid sort of shadow that they couldn't make any sense of that appeared there. The idea that that's Phobos 2 was shot down. The idea that the superpowers of the world are, they may know something, or they may think that something could happen, and therefore they look at that and say, yes, we must prepare for alien invasion. Russia and the United States must get along. And the Challenger blowing up and stuff like this could have as much factored into such things as otherwise. The hybrid forms and all this other stuff doesn't quite make much sense as... It doesn't quite make as much sense as the idea that people back in the day that hunted and knew about animals and how to butcher them and all sorts of stuff. This is a prime example of how the ancients, they found dinosaur bones too. There's ancient Greek temples and stuff that found dinosaur bones. That doesn't mean that people ever encountered them, and that doesn't mean that Anunnaki needed to tell them about such things. And the terms for human having to do with slavery. The fact that they, I've mentioned the blood, the healing power of the copper, and the Egyptian millions of years could be 12,960,000. That's how they could have. Well, that's what they could have meant. They could have meant this term, the ultimate year. They also had this term Shar, which 3,600, which is where Zecharia Sitchin gets his thing, because, yes, whether it's a spaceship or whether it's a planet, there was always this, are the 10 levels in this, New Age cult that I researched and wrote extensively on. Have yet to get the prints of the papers, but in that group, they believed, in the 10th heaven, that was the top level. At least most of them did. Their mythology was revised to extend past that, expend that. But yes, the languages and the mythologies, and they come from each other, and there's spiritual beings, this Tiamat's spittle and Ki and Kendo, and I've mentioned the copper and the serpent actually being more of a descriptive. There's stuff on Mars and stuff that could be artificial and could line up with stuff, but you search the whole planet, you're going to find something that looks a little weird, and people are doing this more and more. But there was a time where Mars could have had the life that made it to Earth. But, look back into history, consider other sources, try to figure out linguistically and otherwise what stuff reveals, and it doesn't reveal anything about the spaceships and stuff like this, like people who do the ancient aliens thing. It doesn't actually make sense. Oh, this word, let's elaborate it. They had modern great or even better computers back then because this word says something that has information. There's stuff that you can have psychic information. You can take a crystal and psychically store information in there, or it can record information on its own. How to decode that, who knows? But, let's not jump to claims of knowledge where we have no knowledge.